In this class we want to discuss monopoly. We look at competition as a type of spectrum ranging from perfect competition, which is the extreme form of competition, through monopolistic competition, where it's also quite extreme, except all of the products are slightly differentiated, slightly different, through oligopoly, where there is interdependence between the firms. The producers must watch each other and try to outmaneuver each other in the marketplace. Oligopoly is quite realistic. And at the other extreme is monopoly. Monopoly is a situation where there is no competition. Monopoly is where there is just one single producer and there is no competition in the market. So it's also quite extreme. So we've got an idea now of competition running from infinite competition, maximum competition and perfect competition. That's the perfectly competitive model, running all the way through to monopoly, in which there is no competition, a single producer. Now what we want to do in this session is to talk about the implications of having a monopoly and see what we can discover about monopolies from this discussion. So let's start with a very unusual position, a non-profit monopoly. Well, in this diagram, if I can just put the cursor onto the slide, there you are. In this diagram we have average costs. These are short-run average costs, which are U-shaped. We assume that the average cost curve is U-shaped because of the law of diminishing returns. So at lower levels of output there are still economies to be had, still advantages to be had to expand the company and thereby reduce costs, reduce unit costs. And at some stage all of the advantages of the division of labour and of specialisation are exhausted down here, after which, if output continues to expand, we have the diseconomies in here. We have disadvantages to extra production. And that gives us the shape of the average cost curve, the law of diminishing returns in production. So what we've got is a U-shaped average cost curve, short-run average cost curve. This is a short-run model. In the long run we talk about economies of scale and diseconomies of scale, but in this case we're just talking about the short run. And on the model also we've got the average revenue. The average revenue is like our demand curve. It's downward sloping. As output increases, the company may have to cut the price. Average revenue is just the price. They may have to cut the price to stimulate more sales. Hence, the average revenue curve is downward sloping. Now you can see from this diagram that at any level of output, costs are greater than average revenue. So if you look at the diagram, at any level of output, say this level of output here, costs are greater than revenue. Here costs are greater than revenue. Down here costs are clearly greater than revenue. So this company would close down. This company is a non-profit making company and it's a monopoly, and we always assume that monopolies are very rich and very prosperous. You could have a monopoly, be the single producer of something that nobody wants, or your costs are too high. So simply because it's a monopoly doesn't mean it's going to be very profitable. In this case, this monopoly would close down. Let's look at the more usual case. Here's one where at this time, put the cursor back on, at this time average revenue is greater than average cost. In here we have marginal revenue, which has got twice its gradient. Marginal revenue sloping downwards twice as fast as the average there. We have marginal cost. Marginal cost always cuts the average cost at its minimum point, always. So it always cuts there. Students often make mistakes here and draw the marginal cost cutting up here somewhere, cutting over here. That's wrong. It always cuts at the minimum point. And for profit maximization, say QM, profit maximization here, marginal cost must equal marginal revenue. There it is, marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Now at this level of output, the average cost would be A and the average revenue is B. So revenues are greater than costs. Multiply that by the quantity and we get the area of this rectangle in here, which is equivalent to profits. In fact, we call this abnormal profit. Abnormal profit because it's excessive profit. This company is making large sums of money. The abnormal profits are also known as excess profits. And this means that there would be an incentive for companies to try and compete away these if they can get in. But this is a single producer making large profits and profit maximizing. So there are abnormal profits in there, and the abnormal profits are equal to PM BAC. PM BAC. So the area of this rectangle are the extent of the abnormal profits. To maintain the abnormal profits, as I said, the company would have to have barriers to entry. They would have to be able to stop other companies from setting up against them. Once word gets round in the market that the company is making excessive profits or abnormal profits, then other companies will want to join. They want part of the profits. So this particular company will have to stop them. They may have specialist knowledge, for example, or they might have specialist machinery, or they might have a legal right to produce this that other people have not got. So there are various possibilities that will stop them from stop other companies from producing. If we compare monopoly and perfect competition, we would get something like this. Here's our situation we just had a moment ago. PM was the monopoly price. This is here. This rectangle in here would be the, or it's not drawn in exactly, but that's the abnormal profit area in there. If it was perfectly competitive, the marginal revenue would be horizontal. The average revenue would be horizontal, which is of course just equal to the price. If it's horizontal, it'll touch the average cost curve just at the bottom, just at this point here. So what we've got now is we've got the monopoly position with price at PM versus the perfectly competitive price of PC. Now you can see the consumer will pay a lot less under competitive conditions. The consumer pays this much under perfect competition. Under monopoly, it'll pay much more. Also, under perfect competition, the consumers will get more of the good, whereas under monopoly, they get less. And therefore, it's concluded often that competition is better than monopoly, and for that reason we have controls on monopoly. However, let's look at some advantages associated with monopoly. Well, the first one is, if a company is making large sums of money, large profits, there may be job security for the people working there. And job security is important. Do you really want to work for a company that's very competitive but just surviving? Or do you want to work for a company that's a monopoly, making large profits, giving you a bonus and a company car and looking after you? There's a tension there. There's an issue to be addressed. Also, monopoly can afford research and development and make investments for the long run, whereas a perfectly competitive firm whose profits are squeezed can't afford to make research and development expenditure. So in the long run, we would be worse off. The consumers would be worse off. We don't get new products and we don't get new ways of doing things, and economic growth would be restricted. Also, foreign companies could easily compete because the foreign companies, monopolies here could easily compete with the foreign companies because the foreign companies have become large, have become monopolistic. What's needed are monopolies to fight monopolies. So a country with monopoly and large investments in R&D and high rates of economic growth perhaps are in a better way, better position to fight foreign competition. And also, monopolies can donate money to charities and to good causes. They've got excess funds, whereas perfectly competitive firms don't have the resources. They don't have the profits to do that. And of course, the large companies benefit from economies of scale, economies due to size. As companies get bigger, they can have specialist machinery, specialist departments, specialist personnel. They can have R&D expenditure. They have specialist distribution outlets. They benefit from their size. They're able to negotiate discounts on bulk buying and negotiate favourable terms in the banks. So large companies have got advantages in all sorts of ways. Now, these are some of the advantages of monopoly. We've already seen earlier that the basic model that's used is this one here, which is to compare perfect competition or a competitive model with monopoly. And as you can see, perfect competition appears to be much better. We get it cheaper and we get more of it, more of the product. Here we pay more for the product and we get less of the product. Therefore, perfectly competitive markets are better. Competition is better than monopoly. However, as I've also just pointed out, there are actually advantages to monopoly that need to be taken into account. So there is a debate. It's not as clear-cut as the diagram would suggest. Okay, that's an overview of monopoly versus perfect competition. Hope that was of some use. Thank you for watching.